Hello and welcome to ABC of Storytelling 2.0. My name is Rituparna and every week I share tips, tricks, techniques and secrets that help you tell better stories in your business, in your life and in your work. Storytelling is both an art and a science. And if you want to use stories strategically to connect with another human being, to market, to sell, to convince them to do your bidding, to influence them, to persuade them, or even to inspire them, you need to know how stories impact the listener's brain. What's the science behind it? So that you can create and craft a story that literally lights up parts of their brains that impact and influence the way they feel and think about you. This week we are on the letter P and I have a host of P's for you. Keep counting and keep following. And just to make it a little simpler and do this video a little differently, I decided I'm going to talk about all the P's with a story. When I was 10, my father took us, my brother and I, to watch or to see the Betla National Park. Now, I grew up in Jamshedpur, which is in Jharkhand today, but back then it was in Bihar. And as a little girl, I remember going and seeing a forest up close and personal for the very first time. It was a beautiful place. It smelled different, it looked different, and the surroundings, the silence of the forest really grew on me as a young child. But at that forest was that trip was a very eventful trip. You see, somewhere on that safari while we were in the jungle, I was bit by a mysterious insect. It came and bit me on my face, and within a few minutes my face had begun to swell. By the time we ended up leaving or were ready to leave the forest, my face had swollen up. I was in a lot of pain and nobody seemed to know what kind of an insect had bitten me. Was it a mosquito? Definitely not a mosquito. Was it a kind of an insect which had a poison in it? Do I need a doctor? Do I need a special kind of a medicine? What do I need? Everybody was talking. The forest officers who had, or the guides who had taken us into the forest, they were talking to my parents, and we were trying to figure out what has bitten me and what can I do to really bring that swelling down, or to really even treat it. And there I was in a lot of pain, completely in awe of the jungle, and then bitten by an insect. I was not happy. I was in a lot of turmoil myself. And I remember while we were walking out of that forest, my father called me and he said, "Why don't you come here? I've got something to show." And I looked at him. I said, "What is it?" So at the gate, at the entrance, there was a tree, and on that tree there was a little cupboard. A cupboard which could have been opened. You know, the kind of cupboards where you store keys or some kind of tools. You know, so that kind of a very average looking cupboard. And on that cupboard, it said, open it to find the world's most deadliest animal. And there I was at the entrance of this, or the exit of the national park, waiting to step out because I had been bitten by a mysterious insect. I was already in a lot of pain. Here I was, who was enjoying the forest a minute back, but again now in a lot of pain, and I wanted to get out of that forest. And at that moment, when my father called me and he said, "Come and take a look, open this up," I said, "I don't want to. I don't want to. I will not open that cupboard because I don't know what's inside." And my father kept saying, "Don't worry, it's not what you're thinking, but I want you to still open this and see what's inside." And I said, "I will not." And my brother, who was much younger, he was the one who was very courageous. He kept pushing me. "It's okay. Why are you so scared? Go ahead and open it up." I refused. My father waited for me, and then he opened the doors of that cupboard. Do you know what was inside? It was a mirror. And that 10-year-old me, who had been bitten by a very unknown insect and was in a lot of pain because of that, looked at herself in that mirror, and I was shocked. I was shocked because at that point of time, I did not feel like the stronger animal in that jungle, or I did not feel like the most deadliest animal in that jungle. I felt really defenseless. But here I was, bitten by a mysterious insect and a lot of pain. The 10-year-old me did not understand what that cupboard meant to convey. But of course, as I was growing up, as life happened, as we interacted with the world and the natural world, at that, I realized that really humans are the most deadliest animal on this planet. Now, this story, I just told it a couple of days back at a workshop, in a workshop that I was conducting with an environmental organization. And the question that I was asked at the beginning was, why are we here? Why are we here to talk about stories and storytelling? And I decided to bring this little story, a personal story from my life, to share it with them, to even begin a conversation. Why did I do that? I'm going to tell you in my first step of ABC of Storytelling 2.0 in the letter P. Now, I covered this marginally in the previous video of ABC of Storytelling 2.0, where I called personal stories as original stories that you can tell. But really, personal stories is a kind of repertoire, is the kind of stories that all of us have in our story bag. We all have lived through experiences, incidents that have really shaped us. Now, I'm not talking about the big incidents. Even everyday normal incidents, your normal conversation with your spouse, with your child, with your partner, with a subordinate, with your maid. These are the stories that can also give you a lot of insight. And these are the stories when you share with anyone, whether it's your interaction with somebody in the lift, somebody you met at the supermarket, somebody you saw while driving down on the way to work. These are the kind of stories that really show that you're connected with your universe. And these are the stories that show a really human part of you, that you are real, that you have everyday kind of experiences like others have, and at the same time you're willing to share your experiences with everyone. Now, each of these stories can be shared, but like with every other story that you tell, using a personal story comes with a bit of a caveat. It is, of course, having a definitive purpose, using that story to create and to connect or to communicate a very specific idea. When I shared my personal story of traveling or visiting the Betla forest as a 10-year-old, what it did for a client who was in the field of nature, environment, conservation, it just showed that what was my interaction with nature at the first go and why am I trying to help them. It also showed them that I understand where they come from. I understand why their work is important and why it is important for them to find the right stories to tell to the world. Now, while I do all of this, it's also important that a personal story creates a bridge between the teller and the listener. And as long as you focus on that quality of personal stories, you will know how to use a personal story. Don't shy away from it. Don't keep your personal life, and it is all right to keep your personal life hidden from your professional life, but use a personal story to create a kind of connection and a bond with your listener so that you can share where you are coming from, how well do you understand the person, the listener, and why is it important for you to share a personal part of your or a story that you wouldn't have shared with everyone. Even if you're a private person, you can choose which kind of personal stories that you want to tell to the world. It is not wrong. It is absolutely right. You can use a personal story in your business, in your profession, no matter if you're a leader, you're a coach, a trainer, a manager, or an entrepreneur. A personal story is a great resource to have. Next tip is particularly useful for those who share stories orally. A pause is a definite pause or a break that you make in the middle of your story so that it allows your listener to do a few things. It can be a fraction of a second or an entire second, but definitely not more than a 2, because that means you've forgotten your story or you're just waiting for your listeners to say something. A pause allows your listener to consider that moment, to put together all the elements of the story that you've shared with them, and then wait for the next development. It tells them that something is going to happen right now, and I want you to think about it. I'm letting you think about it. A pause is also a tool to let your listeners, find the relevance of what you're trying to say. It also tells them that you know what you're thinking, and you want them to believe that you as the teller knows and trusts them to find the right clue. In my story, when I was talking about Betla Forest, and I really paused at that moment when my father was about to open up that cupboard, and I waited to tell you what's inside. That's because a part of you, I know, even though you're listening to me, you would know what's inside that cupboard, or you are curious to know about what's inside that cupboard. A pause is therefore a great tool to let your audience even think, what is it, where is the story headed to, and why is she even telling that story? So pause is a great tool. Use it well. It's a powerful tool to be used within a story. Use it right and let your listeners know that you are thinking about them even while you are telling a story. A pause is also a great way, and it's a secret. It lets you catch your breath. If you are telling stories orally, trust me, you will need it. So use your pause well. Take a pause, catch a breath, and continue your story. My next tip is also useful for those who will tell stories orally. Now, you can tell stories in many multiple scenarios orally. You can use them in a speech, in a talk, in a presentation, in a pitch. You can use stories even in your conversations. Now, except for conversations where you literally don't plan for a story as much, you just pick up something that you've experienced and you go with it on an impulse. The other scenarios, whether it's a presentation, pitch, or a talk, or a speech, you will have the chance to really prepare your story. And that's one tip that I would really like to give anyone who is in that similar situation. If you have time, prepare your story well. Put your thoughts together. Identify the core purpose that you're using this particular story for. Write down your thoughts. Recall the details. Put your story together and have a script for it ready. Yes, having a script, we're going to cover that in S for script. Script is very, very important because it helps you understand how long will your story be. If you prepared your story well, then of course the next step is to practice it. Practice it by telling it to yourself. You could record yourself, or you could stand in front of a mirror and tell it to particularly no one. But while you're telling it, imagine your audience in front of you. Imagine they are sitting there, whether the story is meant for one person, for a group of people, or for an entire audience, a known audience or an unknown audience. Imagine they are there right in front of you, and practice your glance. Whether you're going to stand up while telling the story, whether you'll be seated while telling the story, work on your body language, look at your left and your right, look from the front up till the back, keep your glance steady, practice your pauses so that you know where and how will you pause and what effect will it have on your listeners. Number 3 is to go and perform. Of course, while you are telling the story, if you prepared well, if you practiced well, you can go and tell your story in front of your audience. You could have also practiced your story with a friend in front of your mentor or somebody who's going to give you constructive feedback about how you can get your story ready. But when you go and perform, you're really out there on your own. But that's not where your task ends. Your story does not end by just going and telling it. Your work begins on yourself. So remember, while you're performing, you must also give feedback to yourself. Gather all that's happening while you're telling your story. Did your audience laugh when you wanted them to laugh? Did they nod? Did they shake their head? Did they lean in and listen? Did they look interested? How did your audience really take in your story? Did they align with your thoughts? Did they get offended by the way you told your story, or they were not interested at all? All of this goes into the feedback that you give yourself, the intelligence that you gather from having told a story that you've prepared and practiced. Remember, your performance is the key to ensure that this story will work perhaps another time, or with some modifications, or just the way it is. So while you're performing your story, bring back all this evidence, and so that you can use it to get ready for your next story. The last set of P's that I have this week is patience and persistence. Storytelling, particularly for businesses, for individuals, for organizations, cannot be a one-time affair. If you really want stories and storytelling to impact the way you communicate to the world, the way people think about you, and the way people interact with you and your organization, remember, you have to be patient and at the same time remain persistent. There are lots of stories waiting to be told, so don't wait for that one story to do its work and everything is going to fall into place. If you're going to use stories and storytelling, remember to try out different formats of storytelling. Tell it orally, use a film, use audio, use pictures, use graphics, you may have a book, you may have a podcast. There are so many ways to tell stories today, and you have to find the right mediums, the right channels, the right formats, and keep telling your stories in these multiple ways so that you're consistent, but at the same time persistent, that you want people to take note of your stories, that your stories matter, and your stories are there because you're working very hard to create them, not for consumption, but because you really want people to know about you, and you really want stories to make an impact on your various stakeholders, that they matter and what they think about you is important. So remember to be patient, remember to be persistent, and keep working on your set of stories. And that's all I have time for this week on ABC of Storytelling 2.0. We just wrapped up the piece, and I'm excited that I could bring up so many pieces for you. I hope you find this video useful. But remember to subscribe, to like, to share. You never know who needs stories and storytelling, and I will be very, very happy to listen to your stories, to know how are you applying the ABCs. So go ahead and drop me an email, write your comment below, and tell me what you think. I am always eager to listen to your stories. So if you want me to look at what your next story will be and help you polish it for your audience, you can write to me, you can get on a discovery call. Until the next letter, until the next ABC, happy storytelling.